The moment Julia Emerson saw the headline about Thornfield Industries' latest acquisition going south, she knew her small consulting firm would lose its biggest contract and probably take her career down with it. She sat at her desk in the cramped office she shared with two other consultants, staring at her laptop screen while her coffee went cold. The news had broken 20 minutes ago. Thornfield Industries had just purchased a struggling manufacturing company called Bergman Steel, and according to insider reports, the place was a complete disaster. Safety violations, accounting irregularities, employee lawsuits piling up. Julia's firm had been hired 3 months ago to help streamline operations across Thornfield's portfolio, and Bergman Steel was supposed to be their test case, their chance to prove they could handle the big leagues. Now it looked like a nightmare. Her phone buzzed. A text from her business partner, Marcus. Conference call with Thornfield in 30 minutes. They want you to lead the Bergman assessment. Julia's stomach dropped. She was only 27, the youngest partner at Emerson and Associates by 5 years. She had fought hard to earn her place, working 70-hour weeks, taking on projects no one else wanted, proving she could deliver results. But this felt different. This felt like being set up to fail. She spent the next 25 minutes frantically researching everything she could find about Bergman Steel. The picture that emerged made her want to quit on the spot. The factory was located in a Rust Belt town 3 hours upstate. Former employees described it as dangerous, chaotic, a place where corners got cut and people got hurt. The previous owner had apparently kept 2 sets of books and disappeared the day before the acquisition closed. Thornfield had bought a ticking time bomb. The conference call started exactly on time. Julia dialed in, her heart hammering. "Miss Emerson." The voice was deep, calm, and unfamiliar. "This is Derek Thornfield." Julia nearly dropped her phone. Derek Thornfield was the CEO of Thornfield Industries, a man worth somewhere north of $2 billion according to Forbes. She had never spoken to him directly. All their previous interactions had been with middle management. "Mr. Thornfield," she managed. "I wasn't expecting you on this call. I make it a point to be involved when things get complicated," he said. "And Bergman Steel is very complicated. I've reviewed your work on our other facilities. You have good instincts." "Thank you," Julia said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need you to go to the Bergman factory tomorrow morning, do a full assessment. I want to know exactly what we are dealing with." He paused. "Don't go in alone." Julia blinked. "I'm sorry, don't go in alone," Derek repeated. "I'll be there with you." The line went quiet for a moment. Julia felt her pulse quicken for reasons that had nothing to do with professional anxiety. "You're coming personally?" she asked. "I've already looked into what's waiting for you inside," Derek said, and something in his tone made her skin prickle with awareness. "It's not safe for anyone to walk in there without backup, especially not someone the former management might see as a threat." Julia's mouth went dry. "What exactly did you find?" "We'll discuss it in person. Meet me at the factory gates at 8 tomorrow morning. And Miss Emerson, bring steel-toed boots. This isn't going to be a boardroom assessment." The call ended before she could respond. Julia sat in stunned silence, her mind racing. Derek Thornfield was personally accompanying her to a factory assessment. The CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company was going to spend his day trudging through a probably hazardous industrial site because he thought it was too dangerous for her to go alone. She pulled up Derek Thornfield's profile on her computer, something she had deliberately avoided doing before because it seemed unprofessional to Google your clients. The man looking back at her from the screen was 42 years old, dark-haired, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to assess everything. He had built Thornfield Industries from a small manufacturing company he inherited from his father into an industrial empire. The articles described him as brilliant, demanding, and intensely private. There were no scandal stories, no messy divorces, no tabloid drama, just business success and a reputation for integrity that was rare in his world. Julia closed her laptop and tried to focus on preparing for tomorrow, but her thoughts kept drifting back to that phone call. The way he had said, "Don't go in alone," had sounded less like a business directive and more like genuine concern. She told herself she was reading too much into it. Derek Thornfield probably talked to all his contractors this way. He was just being thorough, protecting his investment. But that night, as she packed her briefcase and laid out clothes for the next day, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The drive upstate took Julia 3 hours through increasingly gray landscape. Late October had stripped the trees bare, and the sky was the color of old concrete. She arrived at the Borgman Steel factory 15 minutes early and parked outside the chain-link fence that surrounded the property. The place looked worse in person than it had in photographs. The main building was a sprawling structure of corrugated metal and crumbling brick, with narrow windows that were either broken or covered in grime. Weeds grew through cracks in the parking lot. A faded sign near the entrance read, "Safety First," but someone had spray painted over it in red. Julia sat in her car, suddenly very grateful she would not be going in alone. A black SUV pulled up beside her exactly at 8 o'clock. The driver's door opened and Derek Thornfield stepped out. Julia's breath caught. Photographs had not done him justice. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of physical presence that made you pay attention. He wore jeans, work boots, and a canvas jacket over a dark shirt. His hair was slightly wind-blown, and when he turned to look at her, his eyes were an unexpected shade of gray-blue that seemed to see right through her. Julia got out of her car, suddenly self-conscious about her own outfit. She had worn practical clothes like he suggested, jeans and a sweater with boots, but she still felt underdressed next to him. "Miss Emerson," Derek said, walking over to her, "thank you for coming on short notice." "Of course," Julia said, shaking his offered hand. His grip was firm and warm, and he held on just a fraction longer than necessary. "Though I have to admit, I'm curious about what you meant yesterday, about it not being safe." Derek's expression darkened. "Come with me. There's something you need to see before we go inside." He led her around the perimeter of the fence, to a section hidden from the main road by overgrown bushes. Someone had cut through the chain link, creating an opening large enough for a person to slip through. "There have been people coming and going from this property at night," Derek said. "Ever since we closed the acquisition, security cameras caught them 3 times this week." Julia's stomach tightened. "What are they doing? We don't know yet. Could be former employees taking equipment they think they are owed. Could be something worse." He looked at her directly. "That's why I wanted to be here with you. I've hired additional security, but they won't arrive until this afternoon. I didn't want you walking into an unknown situation alone." Julia felt a strange warmth spread through her chest despite the cold morning air. "You came all the way up here personally because you were worried about my safety." Derek held her gaze. "You're working for me. That makes you my responsibility." "I'm sure you have dozens of contractors," Julia said softly. "You can't personally protect all of them." "No," Derek agreed. "But I can protect you." The words hung between them, loaded with something Julia couldn't quite name. She had the sudden, startling realization that Derek Thornfield had not just looked into what was waiting for her inside the factory. He had been thinking about her specifically, going into potential danger. He had rearranged his schedule, driven 3 hours, and was now standing in a weedy lot in steel-toed boots because he did not want her to face this alone. "Shall we?" Derek gestured toward the main entrance. They walked to the factory's front door. Derek had keys from the acquisition, and the door opened with a rusty shriek that echoed through the empty building. The interior was dim, lit only by the weak daylight filtering through dirty windows. The air smelled of machine oil, rust, and something else Julia could not identify. The main floor was a vast space filled with silent equipment, stamping presses, conveyor systems, cutting machines, all covered in a layer of dust and neglect. "Jesus," Julia whispered. "It gets worse," Derek said. He pulled out a flashlight and handed her one as well. "The office area is upstairs. That's where we found the real problems." They climbed a metal staircase to a second level that overlooked the factory floor. Up here were rows of offices with glass windows, most of them empty. Derek led her to the largest office at the end, which must have belonged to the former owner. The space had been ransacked. Filing cabinets stood open, their contents scattered across the floor. A desktop computer was missing its hard drive. Papers covered every surface. "This happened after the acquisition closed," Derek said. "Someone came back for something." Julia knelt down and started examining the papers. Most were routine business documents, but then she saw something that made her blood run cold. It was a handwritten ledger, the kind someone keeps when they don't want electronic records. The entries detailed cash payments to local officials, falsified inspection reports, and bribes paid to avoid safety citations. "This is evidence of criminal activity," Julia said, looking up at Derek. "If this became public, it wouldn't just hurt Bergman Steel, it could hurt Thornfield Industries." "I know," Derek said quietly. He crouched down beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "That's what I was protecting you from. The people who created these problems don't want them coming to light. If you had come here alone, started asking questions, started finding this kind of evidence, you could have become a target." Julia's hands trembled slightly as she held the ledger. "What do we do?" "We document everything," Derek said. "We turn it over to the authorities, and we make sure you stay safe while we do it." They spent the next 3 hours methodically photographing and cataloging everything in the office. Derek worked beside her the entire time, his presence steady and reassuring. He had a methodical way of approaching the work, careful and thorough, but he also kept checking on her, making sure she was okay, offering water from a bottle he had brought. Around noon, they took a break and sat on the metal stairs overlooking the factory floor. "Can I ask you something?" Julia said, unwrapping the sandwich she had packed. "Anything," Derek replied. "Why did you really come here today? You could have sent security. You could have had me report back remotely. Why show up in person?" Derek was quiet for a long moment. He stared out over the silent machinery below them. "You want the professional answer or the honest one?" he finally asked. Julia's heart skipped. "The honest one." He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Because from the moment I saw your name on the consultant list 3 months ago, I have been looking for an excuse to meet you in person. Your reports were brilliant, insightful. You saw patterns no one else caught. And when this situation with Bergman came up, when I realized you would be the one they sent into what might be a dangerous situation, the thought of you walking in here alone made me feel something I hadn't felt in a very long time." "What?" Julia whispered. "Fear," Derek said simply. "The kind that comes from caring about someone." Julia's sandwich sat forgotten in her lap. "You don't even know me. I know your work. I know your mind. I know you fought to build your consulting firm from nothing. I know you are brilliant and brave and probably way too good at your job to be wasting time on a disaster like this factory." He paused. "And I know that if something happened to you because I didn't do everything in my power to keep you safe, I would never forgive myself." Julia could not breathe. This was not how client relationships were supposed to go. This was not professional or appropriate or anything she had ever experienced before. But looking into Derek Thornfield's eyes, seeing the raw honesty there, she could not bring herself to care about any of that. "I'm glad you came," she said softly. Derek's expression shifted, something warm and almost vulnerable crossing his features. "So am I." They sat there on the metal stairs, sandwiches forgotten, just looking at each other while autumn light filtered through dirty windows, and the empty factory held its secrets around them. The moment was broken by the sound of a door slamming somewhere below. Derek was on his feet instantly, his hand on Julia's arm, pulling her back against the wall where they couldn't be seen from the factory floor. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. Julia's heart hammered as she heard footsteps on the concrete below, the sound echoing through the cavernous space. There were voices, at least 2 people, maybe more. "This is not good," one voice said. "Thornfield's people have been all over this place." "Did you get the files?" another voice asked. "Most of them, but there's still the ledger. The old man said he left it in the office." Julia's eyes widened. She looked down at her briefcase where the ledger was now safely stored. These people were here looking for the evidence they had just found. Derek's jaw was set, his body tense. He pulled out his phone and quickly typed something, showing it to Julia. "Security is 10 minutes out. Stay quiet." The voices below continued. Julia counted 3 distinct speakers, all male, all sounding increasingly agitated. "If that ledger gets out, we're all going to prison," the first voice said. "We need to find it before some consultant hands it over to the feds." "Maybe we should just burn the whole place down," the second voice suggested. "Make it look like an electrical fire. Destroy all the evidence." Julia felt Derek tense beside her. His hand moved to the small of her back, protective and grounding. "Too suspicious now," the third voice said. "Thornfield just bought the place. A fire would bring every investigator in the state." "Then we find that ledger," the first voice said. "Check the office again." Footsteps started toward the stairs. Derek looked at Julia, and in his eyes she saw calculation and determination. He leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "If they come up here, I want you to run. Go out the back exit, get to your car, and drive away. Don't wait for me." "I'm not leaving you," Julia whispered back, fierce. "Julia," Derek said, and the sound of her first name in his voice did something to her insides. "Please." But before she could respond, one of the men below shouted, "There's someone up there. I saw movement." Everything happened fast after that. Derek grabbed Julia's hand and ran, pulling her down the corridor away from the stairs. Behind them, she heard heavy footsteps pounding up the metal steps. Derek tried several office doors before finding one that opened. He pushed Julia inside and locked the door behind them. The room was small, windowless, containing only a desk and filing cabinet. There was no other exit. "Your security," Julia said urgently. "How far away?" Derek checked his phone. 5 minutes. The footsteps were in the corridor now, doors banging open as the men searched. "We're trapped," Julia said. Derek moved the heavy desk, jamming it against the door. It would not hold long, but it might buy them time. Then he turned to Julia, put his hands on her shoulders. "Listen to me," he said. "Whatever happens, I'm going to make sure you walk out of here safely." "That's a promise." "Derek," Julia started, but he shook his head. "I need you to know something," he said, speaking quickly, urgently. "This morning, coming here, spending this time with you, it's been the best day I've had in years. I know that sounds crazy." We're trapped in a locked room in a condemned factory with criminals trying to break down the door. But I don't care, because I'm here with you, and that makes everything else bearable." Julia felt tears prick her eyes. "You can't say things like that right now. We need to focus on getting out of here." "I'm saying them because we might not get another chance," Derek said. "And I've spent too much of my life being careful, being professional, never taking risks that matter. But you matter, Julia. You matter more than anything, and I needed you to know that." Someone slammed against the door. The desk scraped forward an inch. Julia threw her arms around Derek's neck and kissed him. It was desperate and fierce and probably completely insane given their circumstances, but Julia did not care. Derek kissed her back with equal intensity, one hand tangling in her hair, the other pressed against the small of her back, holding her close as if he could protect her from the world through sheer force of will. The door shook again, harder this time. They broke apart, breathless. Then they heard it, sirens. The men in the corridor heard it too. There was cursing, running footsteps heading away. Derek kept Julia wrapped in his arms, his face buried in her hair as they listened to chaos erupt in the factory below. Doors crashed. More sirens. Shouting. Minutes later, someone knocked on the door, professional and controlled. "Mr. Thornfield, this is Apex Security. Are you in there?" Derek let out a shaky breath and released Julia, though he kept hold of her hand. "We're here. We're okay." It took 20 minutes for the security team to clear the building and determine it was safe. The 3 men who had broken in were apprehended trying to flee through the cut fence. The police arrived shortly after, and Julia gave a statement while Derek spoke with the security chief. Through it all, Derek kept Julia close, his hand on her back or arm, as if he needed the physical connection to reassure himself she was really all right. By the time the police were done taking statements and photographing the evidence Julia and Derek had collected, it was nearly dark. The factory was now crawling with official personnel, and Julia felt exhausted to her bones. Derek walked her to her car as floodlights were being set up around the perimeter. "You should not drive home tonight," Derek said. "Not after everything that just happened. There's a hotel in town. Let me get you a room, make sure you're safe before I leave." "Where will you stay?" Julia asked. "The same hotel," Derek said. "I'm not leaving you alone, Julia, not after today." Something warm bloomed in Julia's chest. "Okay." The hotel was small but clean, the kind of place that catered to traveling salespeople and families on road trips. Derek got them rooms next to each other, but as they stood in the hallway outside their doors, neither of them moved to go inside. "I should let you rest," Derek said, but he did not step away. "I'm not sure I can sleep," Julia admitted. "Too much adrenaline." "Me too," Derek said. He hesitated, then added, "Would you want to get dinner? There's a diner down the street." "Nothing fancy, but I don't think either of us should be alone right now." "I would like that," Julia said softly. The diner was nearly empty, just a couple of truck drivers at the counter and a family with young kids in a corner booth. Derek and Julia slid into a booth by the window and ordered coffee and burgers, neither of them particularly hungry but both needing the normalcy of routine. "That was insane," Julia said once the waitress left. "All of it. The factory, those men, being trapped in that room." "I'm sorry," Derek said. "I never should have put you in that situation." "You didn't put me in it," Julia protested. "You protected me from it. If you hadn't been there, if I had gone in alone like I originally planned, those men would have found me with their ledger and no backup." Derek's jaw tightened. I can't even think about that." Julia reached across the table and took his hand. His fingers immediately closed around hers, warm and strong. "But that didn't happen," she said gently. "Because you were there. Because you cared enough to make sure I wasn't alone." Derek looked down at their joined hands. "When I heard those men talking about burning the building down, All I could think about was getting you out safely. Nothing else mattered. Not the evidence, not the company, not any of it, just you. Derek, Julia whispered. He looked up, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her chest ache. I meant what I said in that office. You matter to me. More than you should after only a few hours, more than I can rationally explain. But I can't pretend I don't feel this. I feel it too, Julia said. And it's terrifying because this isn't how this is supposed to work. You're my client. I'm supposed to be professional. Then let's change that, Derek said. Fire Thornfield Industries. I'll pay out your contract, find another consulting firm to finish the work. Then we won't have a professional relationship anymore. Julia blinked. You would do that, in a heartbeat, Derek said. If it means I get to take you to dinner somewhere better than a roadside diner, if it means I get to know everything about you without worrying about professional boundaries. If it means I get a chance at this at us, then yes, absolutely. Their food arrived, but neither of them touched it. I don't want to fire you as a client, Julia said slowly. I want to finish the Borgman project. I want to help you clean up this mess and turn that factory into something good. Derek's expression fell slightly. Okay, I understand. But Julia continued, a smile tugging at her lips. I think I could make an exception to my usual professional boundaries, just this once for you. Hope flickered in Derek's eyes. Yeah, Julia said. Because today, when we were trapped in that room and you said those things to me, I realized something. I've been so focused on building my career, on being professional and perfect and never stepping out of line, that I forgot what it feels like to want something just for me. But I want this. I want you. Derek was around the booth and pulling her into his arms before she finished speaking. He kissed her there in the diner, gentle and sweet and full of promise, while the waitress pretended not to notice, and the jukebox played something old and romantic in the background. When they finally broke apart, both of them were grinning like idiots. So, Derek said, sliding into the booth beside her instead of across from her, keeping her tucked against his side. Tell me everything. I want to know all of it. Where you grew up, how you started your company, what you want out of life. Everything. They stayed in that diner until well past midnight, talking and laughing and sharing stories while their coffee went cold and got refilled over and over. Julia learned that Derek had lost his mother when he was 16, that he had built his company while also raising his younger sister, who was now a doctor in Seattle. She learned that he loved hiking and old movies and had a secret weakness for terrible science fiction novels. Derek learned that Julia had grown up in foster care, that she had put herself through business school working 3 jobs, that she had started her consulting firm with money saved from years of living on ramen and determination. He learned that she was afraid of heights but loved swimming, that she could quote entire episodes of classic sitcoms, that she wanted someday to have a family of her own, but had never let herself believe it would really happen. It will happen, Derek said softly, his arm around her shoulders as they finally walked back to the hotel through the cold night air. Everything you want, you deserve all of it. So do you, Julia said. At her hotel room door, Derek kissed her goodnight with a tenderness that made her knees weak. Sleep well, he murmured against her lips. I'll be right next door if you need anything. Derek, Julia said, catching his hand before he could pull away. Stay. His eyes darkened. Julia, if I stay, I'm not going to want to leave. And I don't want to rush you. You're not rushing me, Julia said. Today could have gone so differently. We could have been hurt or worse. And I don't want to waste time being careful when I already know what I want. Derek searched her face, then nodded slowly. Okay, but we're taking this slow. I want to do this right. He stayed, and they lay together in the small hotel bed, fully clothed, wrapped in each other's arms while they talked until the sky started to lighten with dawn. At some point they both fell asleep, Exhausted and content and safer together than apart, Julia woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains and Derek's arms still around her. He was already awake, watching her with an expression so soft it made her heart ache. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," he said back. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in years," Julia admitted. They ordered breakfast in the room and made plans while they ate. The Borgman steel situation would require weeks of work, sorting through the evidence, cooperating with investigators, deciding whether the factory could be salvaged or should be shut down. Derek wanted Julia's firm to continue managing the assessment, but he also made it clear he wanted to see her properly outside of work. "Dinner in the city this weekend," he said. "Somewhere with actual tablecloths and wine lists. Let me take you on a real date." "Only if I get to plan the second date," Julia countered. "Deal," Derek said, kissing her. They drove back to the city separately that morning, but Derek called her before she even made it home, claiming he just wanted to make sure she was safe on the road. He called again that afternoon, ostensibly to discuss the Borgman case but mostly to hear her voice. By evening, they had talked for 3 hours straight about everything and nothing, and Julia felt like a teenager with her first crush, giddy and hopeful and terrified all at once. The weekend date was perfect. Derek took her to a restaurant with a view of the city lights and ordered wine that probably cost more than Julia's car payment. But what made it special was not the luxury. It was the way Derek looked at her across the table like she was the only person in the world. The way he listened when she talked, really listened, like every word mattered. The way he held her hand during the walk back to her apartment and kissed her goodnight with a restraint that spoke volumes about his intentions. "I want to do this right," he said again, his forehead resting against hers. "I want to court you properly, take you out, earn your trust, show you that this is real for me." "It's real for me too," Julia said. "You know that, right?" "I'm starting to believe it," Derek said with a smile that transformed his usually serious face. The second date was Julia's choice, and she took him to a minor league baseball game, something she had loved as a kid in foster care, because tickets were cheap and the atmosphere was fun. Derek, who attended charity galas and business dinners as part of his regular life, looked delighted to be sitting in the bleachers eating hot dogs and cheering for a team neither of them had ever heard of before. "This is amazing," he said, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the game. "I can't remember the last time I did something like this." "Sometimes the simple things are the best," Julia said. "You're teaching me that," Derek said, kissing her temple. The Borgman steel investigation took 6 weeks to fully unfold. Julia worked closely with Derek and the authorities, piecing together the extent of the corruption, and eventually recommending that the factory be completely restructured rather than shut down. With proper management and safety protocols, it could provide jobs for a community that desperately needed them. Derek approved her recommendations and put Julia's firm in charge of overseeing the restructuring. It was the biggest contract they had ever received, and it would make Julia's company a major player in the consulting world. But more important than the professional success was what developed between Julia and Derek during those weeks. They saw each other as often as their schedules allowed, which sometimes meant meeting for coffee at 6 in the morning before Derek had to catch a flight, or having dinner at 10 at night after Julia finished a long day at the Borgman site. They talked on the phone every day, sometimes for hours. Derek sent flowers to her office with notes that made her blush. Julia surprised him at his office with homemade lunch when she knew he had back-to-back meetings and would not take time to eat. They learned each other's rhythms, their habits and quirks. Julia discovered that Derek was an early riser who went for a run every morning at dawn. Derek learned that Julia was useless before her first cup of coffee, but brilliant and sharp once caffeine hit her system. They learned how to be in each other's space, comfortable and easy, but also how to keep the excitement alive with spontaneous dates and stolen moments in between work obligations. 2 months after the factory incident, Derek invited Julia to a company gala. It was a major event, attended by industry leaders and politicians, the kind of thing Julia had only read about in business magazines. She bought a dress she could not quite afford, dark blue and elegant, and felt her nerves spike when Derek picked her up looking devastating in a tuxedo. "You're staring," Derek said with a hint of amusement as they drove to the event. "So are you," Julia shot back, and he laughed. "Guilty. You look incredible." The gala was overwhelming at first, a sea of designer clothes and careful networking. But Derek never left her side, introducing her to everyone not as his consultant but as his partner, making it clear through word and gesture that Julia belonged there with him. During dinner, a business associate asked Derek about the Borgman Steel situation. "I heard you got taken for a ride on that acquisition," the man said. "Bad due diligence." "Actually, it's working out better than expected," Derek said smoothly. "We brought in excellent consultants who helped us identify and address the problems. The factory will be fully operational and compliant within 6 months, and it's going to be a model for our other facilities." "Consultants," the man scoffed. "Waste of money if you ask me." "I disagree," Derek said, his hand finding Julia's under the table. "Sometimes bringing in the right people makes all the difference. Sometimes one person can change everything." He was looking at Julia when he said it, and she felt warmth spread through her entire body. Later, when they were dancing, Derek pulled her close and whispered, "I love you." Julia's breath caught. They had been building toward this for weeks, the feeling growing stronger every day, but hearing him say it made it real in a way nothing else had. "I love you too," she whispered back. Derek kissed her there on the dance floor, in front of colleagues and competitors and everyone who mattered in his professional world, making a statement about what she meant to him that no words could match. The months that followed were a whirlwind of happiness. Julia's company grew rapidly with the success of the Borgman project. She hired more staff, moved into a bigger office, started fielding calls from other major corporations. Derek supported her every step of the way, celebrating her victories and helping her navigate challenges, but always careful to let it be her success, her achievement. They moved in together in the spring, choosing a place that was theirs rather than his or hers, a brownstone with big windows and a small garden where they could grow herbs and vegetables. Derek taught Julia to cook properly instead of living on takeout and microwave meals. Julia introduced Derek to the joy of lazy Sunday mornings, spent reading newspapers in bed and doing absolutely nothing productive. They visited Derek's sister in Seattle and Julia's former foster mother in Philadelphia, introducing each other to the pieces of their pasts that had shaped them. They took a vacation to Maine, renting a cabin by the ocean and spending a week hiking and swimming and being completely alone together. It was during that trip, sitting on the beach watching the sunset, that Derek asked Julia to marry him. He did not have a ring yet because he wanted her to help choose it, but he had the words memorized and the sincerity in his eyes unmistakable. "I know we haven't been together that long," Derek said, holding both her hands in his. "But I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every night. I want to build something real and lasting, not just professionally but personally. I want a family with you, a future, everything. Julia Emerson, will you marry me?" Julia was crying before he finished, happy tears streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family. Derek's sister was Julia's maid of honor. Julia wore a simple white dress and carried wildflowers. Derek cried when he saw her walking toward him down the aisle they had created in the garden behind their brownstone. The vows they wrote themselves were about partnership and trust, about choosing each other every day, about building a life based on honesty and love and mutual respect. When they kissed as husband and wife, their guests erupted in applause, but Julia barely heard it. All she could focus on was Derek, his hands on her face, his smile brighter than she had ever seen it. "I love you," he said against her lips. "I love you too," she said back. The reception was joyful and intimate, full of laughter and good food and dancing. Derek's business partner gave a speech about how Julia had transformed Derek from a workaholic who never smiled into someone who actually seemed to enjoy life. Julia's former foster mother spoke about how proud she was, how Julia had overcome so much and built not just a successful career but a beautiful life. As the evening wore on and guests started to leave, Derek pulled Julia aside to a quiet corner of the garden. "Happy?" he asked, his arms around her waist. "So happy," Julia said. "I keep thinking about that day at the factory, how scared I was, and how you showed up to make sure I wasn't alone. I think that was the moment I started falling in love with you." "I think I started falling for you long before that," Derek admitted. "Reading your reports, seeing how your mind worked. But that day, getting to actually be with you, talk to you, see your courage firsthand, that was when I knew for certain. I wanted to keep you safe. I wanted to be the person you turned to. I wanted everything with you." "You have it," Julia said softly. "You have me, all of me, for as long as you want." "Forever then," Derek said. "I want you forever." They danced alone in the garden as the stars came out, swaying to music only they could hear, completely lost in each other and the life they were beginning together. A year after their wedding, Julia gave birth to their daughter. They named her Rose, and she had Derek's dark hair and Julia's determination. Derek was an incredible father, patient and gentle, and completely devoted. He rearranged his schedule to be home for bedtime, took paternity leave that his board members thought was excessive, and could be found at 3 in the morning walking the floors with Rose on his shoulder, singing off key lullabies. Julia went back to work after 6 months but scaled back her hours, letting her partners take on more responsibility. She had built something successful, but she had also learned that success meant nothing if you did not have time to enjoy life. Derek had taught her that, just as she had taught him to loosen his grip on constant control and trust other people to help carry the load. They moved to a bigger house when Julia got pregnant with their second child, a boy they named James, who looked exactly like Julia and had his father's serious temperament. The house was in the suburbs with a big backyard for the kids to play in, close to good schools but still an easy commute to the city. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Derek planned a surprise. He took Julia back to the Borgman steel factory, which had been completely transformed. The building had been renovated, the equipment updated, safety protocols implemented. It was now a thriving workplace that employed 300 people and had one of the best safety records in the industry. "I wanted you to see it," Derek said as they toured the facility, now bright and clean and humming with productive energy. "None of this would have happened without you. You saw the potential when everyone else just saw a disaster." "We did this together," Julia said. "We did," Derek agreed. He led her to a conference room where a plaque hung on the wall. It read, "Borgman Steel, restructured 2024. Success through partnership." Below that were their names, Julia's consulting firm and Thornfield Industries, listed as equals. "You didn't have to do that," Julia said, touched. "Yes, I did," Derek said. "This place brought us together. It's where I realized I loved you. I wanted that commemorated." They stood in that conference room, holding hands, remembering the fear and chaos of that first day, the danger they had faced and the love that had grown from it. "Do you ever regret it?" Julia asked. "Taking the risk of getting involved with me when you probably should have kept things professional?" "Never," Derek said firmly. "Best decision I ever made. You are the best decision I ever made. Even better than the business successes," Julia teased. "Especially better than those," Derek said. "Money and companies and acquisitions, they're all just things. But you, our life together, our kids, that's everything. That's what makes all the rest of it matter." They kissed in that conference room, in the place where their story had really begun. And Julia felt the same flutter of excitement and happiness she had felt 5 years earlier, when Derek first told her not to go in alone. He had known even then, she realized. He had looked into what was waiting for her inside, seen the danger and the possibilities, and decided he was going to be there with her no matter what. That decision, that choice to show up and be present and protect her, had changed both their lives in ways neither could have predicted. Years continued to pass, marked by milestones and ordinary moments that built a life. Rose started kindergarten, and James learned to walk. Julia's consulting firm merged with a larger company, making her a senior partner with the financial security she had never had growing up. Derek gradually stepped back from day-to-day operations at Thornfield Industries, promoting younger executives and taking on a more advisory role that gave him time to coach James's little league team and volunteer at Rose's school. They took family vacations every summer, creating traditions and memories. They fought sometimes, like any couple, about small things like whose turn it was to handle bedtime or big things like career decisions and parenting strategies. But they always came back to each other, always chose to work through the problems rather than let them fester. On their 10th anniversary, Derek took Julia back to the diner where they had their first real conversation, the place where they had talked until dawn after the factory incident. The diner was still there, unchanged, still serving mediocre coffee and decent burgers. They slid into the same booth by the window, and Julia laughed at the nostalgia of it. "I cannot believe you remember which booth we sat in," she said. "I remember everything about that night," Derek said. "I remember thinking I had never met anyone like you. I remember wanting to know everything about you. I remember deciding I was going to do whatever it took to make you part of my life." "Mission accomplished," Julia said softly. "Best mission I ever undertook," Derek said. He reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring. "I love you more now than I did the day we got married, more than I did that first night here. Every year, every day, I love you more." "I love you too," Julia said, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for showing up that day. Thank you for making sure I wasn't alone." "Always," Derek said. "That's the promise, right? Through everything, we're not alone, we have each other." They ordered coffee and burgers, laughing at the familiarity of it, and spent the evening talking about their kids and their work and their plans for the future. They talked about retiring someday, maybe traveling more, definitely spoiling their future grandchildren. They talked about the life they had built, imperfect and chaotic and absolutely beautiful. As they left the diner and walked to their car hand in hand, Julia looked up at Derek, this man who had changed everything, and felt overwhelming gratitude. She thought about that scared version of herself, driving to a dangerous factory alone, not knowing that the CEO who would become her husband was already on his way to make sure she was safe. She thought about all the moments since then, big and small, that had woven their lives together into something stronger than either of them could have created alone. "What are you thinking about?" Derek asked, opening her car door. "Just that I'm really glad you're a protective, cautious CEO who couldn't stand the thought of me going into that factory alone," Julia said. Derek laughed, the sound warm and full. "I'm really glad you're a brilliant consultant who is worth breaking all my professional rules for." "We make a good team," Julia said. "The best team," Derek agreed. They drove home through the city to the house where their children were sleeping and their life was waiting. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something lasting from it. Derek had looked into what was waiting for Julia inside that factory all those years ago and had seen danger. But he had also seen possibility, opportunity, the chance to be there for someone who would end up meaning everything to him. And Julia, walking into what could have been a disaster, had found Derek waiting to make sure she did not face it alone. She had found partnership and love, and a future she had never let herself dream about before. That was the real story, she thought as they pulled into their driveway, and Derek came around to open her door, always the gentleman. Not the danger or the drama or even the romance, though all of that mattered. The real story was two people choosing each other, showing up for each other, building a life based on trust and respect and genuine affection that had only deepened with time. "Home," Derek said, taking her hand as they walked to the front door. "Home," Julia agreed, and kissed him under the porch light, surrounded by the life they had created together, grateful every day that he had told her not to go in alone, and that she had trusted him enough to listen. Inside, they checked on their sleeping children. Rose curled up with her stuffed animals. James sprawled across his bed in the careless way of little boys. Derek put his arm around Julia's waist as they stood in the doorway of James's room, both of them marveling at the miracle of these small humans they had created. "We did good," Derek whispered. "We did great," Julia corrected. They went to their own room, prepared for bed, and lay down together like they had thousands of times before. Derek pulled Julia close, her head on his chest, his arms around her. It was comfortable and familiar and exactly right. "I love you," Derek murmured into her hair. "I love you too," Julia said. "Always." And she meant it, that always. Because Derek had shown up when she needed him, had looked ahead and seen the dangers and decided she was worth protecting. He had given her partnership and respect, and a love that had grown deeper and more solid with every passing year. He had given her a family, a home, a life she had never thought possible. In return, she had given him the same. Had taught him to slow down, to value things beyond business success, to open his heart to possibilities he had closed himself off from. Had given him children and laughter, and a reason to come home every night with a smile. They had built this life together, brick by brick, choice by choice, starting from that moment in a dangerous factory when Derek had said, "Don't go in alone," and Julia had realized he meant it, not just as professional advice but as a promise. A promise to be there, to show up, to face whatever came together. It was a promise they had kept every day since, and would keep for all the days to come. Two people who had found each other against the odds and decided that what they had was worth everything. Worth protecting, worth nurturing, worth choosing over and over again. And as they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, in the house full of love they had created, both of them knew without question that they had made the right choice. That walking into that factory together had been the beginning of the best story either of them would ever tell, the story of how they found each other, the story of how they built a life, the story of a love that started with a CEO who refused to let a brilliant consultant face danger alone, and a woman who trusted him enough to let him be there beside her. A love that had grown into something neither of them could have imagined but both of them would cherish forever.